In this video, I'm going to explain put option. Put option gives the holder right to sell the underlying asset but not the obligation by a certain date for a certain price. Underlying asset could be stock, stock put option, index, index put option, commodity, commodity put option. By a certain date is the expiry date of the contract. Certain price is the strike price. It is the price which is specified in the options contract. In put options contract, there are two parties. One is the option buyer and put option seller. Put option buyer has a right to sell the underlying asset at a strike price by a certain date. Put option seller will have obligation to buy if put option buyer exercises his right. Put option buyer pays option premium to put option seller. Consider put option contract on ITC with strike price rupees 150 per share, option premium rupees 17 and expiry April 30, 2020. Mr. Bean believes that stock price of ITC will fall within 1 month's time. Mr. John hopes that stock price of ITC will go up in near future within month's time. Mr. Bean is bearish on stock price of ITC. Mr. John is bullish on stock price of ITC. They both enter into a contract, put option contract. Mr. Bean buys the put option and becomes put option buyer. Mr. John sells the put option and becomes put option seller. Mr. Bean pays option premium to Mr. John rupees 17. Now Mr. Bean has a right to sell the ITC share at rupees 150 by April 2020, and Mr. John will have obligation to buy if Mr. Bean exercises his right. On maturity April 30, 2020, let's assume stock price, we call it spot price also, spot price of ITC happens to 120. Mr. Bean is happy. Mr. Bean is happy because Mr. Bean can exercise his right to sell the ITC share at 150 and can buy ITC share in the open market at rupees 120, which gives inflow to Mr. Bean rupees 30. Since Mr. Bean paid option premium to Mr. John, it is the cost for Mr. Bean. So net profit accrues to Mr. Bean rupees 13, and rupees 13 is the loss for Mr. John. Let's take another scenario. If on maturity price happens to be spot price in the market happens to be 200. Mr. John is happy now because Mr. Bean will not exercise his option right to sell, and option will become worthless. Mr. John gets to keep premium amount, which is 17. In this case, profit for Mr. John is rupees 17, which is the premium amount, and loss for Mr. Bean 17. So this is put option contract.